Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. So, how you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing really well, King. Always good to see you. How are you doing?
Same here. I'm doing great. As I always like to say that, my spiritual energy level is at 10.
Mm-hmm.
I try to make sure it stays at a 10. I shouldn't say I try. I work to make sure it stays at a 10, even though life throws its challenges. But, what I realize is the only thing I can control is how I respond to those challenges. And I see no benefit, honestly, logically, in choosing a number below 10.
Yeah.
Even though, like I said, there's points in my day that I would say give me, headache, frustration, pause. What I've committed myself to is never having a bad day. I may have bad moments in my day, but never having a bad day, so
Yeah.
that's my attitude. And when I wake up in the morning, it's never, as long as I can, wake up with my gratitude of, and that's an excellent segue into that, been able to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, have sound mind, roof over my head, mother who's alive, have sound mind, um, food to eat, opportunities to learn and grow, then that's an excellent thing to be grateful for. And that to me starts me off with a wonderful day.
Yeah, beautiful. Just to jump into my own gratitude, my standard operating system is to just be grateful for. Yeah, I've always had indoor plumbing. I've always had a refrigerator with food in it, and the electricity that makes that happen. Um, and just as you said, I mean, just having a body and a mind that work reasonably well. And touching on something that you said as well, I'm grateful for I don't know if it's wisdom or knowledge or just acceptance that nothing is permanent. And so if I am having a bad moment or something difficult comes into my consciousness, I know from experience now that it doesn't last forever. And I also know that the best moments, like something really good happens, that's going to be ephemeral as well. Um, So knowing that things come and go, I'm grateful for that. So it keeps me from getting in any way complacent because things are good, or getting sad and depressed and despairing because things are challenging. So that idea of nothing lasts forever, ever, even though it sounds negative, it's actually a kind of a balancing reality. So I'm grateful for that as well.
Absolutely. Just one quick point on that. I've been walking a lot with my dog, which is one of the reasons I got a dog. Was I like to walk and having a dog to walk with. And that's had its challenges within itself. No one tells you that walking a dog is a learning experience. You just think you can get a dog and then you all can just go out and walk. It's a whole different set of challenges you have to get to the point where you all can have a pleasurable walk. Dogs don't want to necessarily walk. They want to walk on your time and your focus. They want to get into what they're into and what they're interested in. Particularly, you have a puppy. So anyway, long story short, we got to the point where it still has its challenges, but I can get through a 5 mile walk pretty well.
Mm.
And I had made a mistake of switching over from tennis shoes over to boots because I felt that I wanted to, I walk on grass a lot of times with her to give her a grass effect. I'd rather walk with the boots in the grass. And I had done that for the last 2.5 weeks. And just 2 days ago, I woke up, or just by the end of the night, I realized that the ball of my foot was just really aching. And it just got progressively worse the rest of the night, So I started doing research on the internet to find out what was going on. I mean, it got to the point I couldn't sleep because it was just aching so much.
Huh?
And I couldn't walk. So I forgot the condition they said it happens, the proper term, but it said get rest. So I had to rest 2 days. And now I'm back. And I actually had to miss an event that I wanted to go to because I couldn't go and stand. It was bothering me that much. I had to limp. But now it's better. So I say all that to say, when you mentioned about nothing lasts forever, that's what I thought about, because during that time frame, it's like you think it's going to last forever. And I read about how it can last for 5 to 6 weeks. I'm like, that's the last thing I need another, pain that's going to have the issue. And finally, the event I was going to go to was an event that I had went to where I had to go and have my fingers wrapped last time. So I hate to go back to these individuals again. This time it's been 6 months. Now I'm limping. It's like this guy's, every time we see this guy, he's always in pain. He's always injured. So, but that's a good thing about it. Nothing lasts forever. So like you said, there's pros and cons to that. The good things you do want to last forever, but the bad things you want to pass, briefly, but wisdom comes from both. And that's the main thing.
Yeah.
So with that being said, what do you have on slate for our topic for today?
Yeah, so we're speaking, as we have been for the last almost about 11 months now, speaking about the book Healing America's Narratives, subtitled The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow, Becoming More Fully Human, which takes a look at the part of the United States that many Americans tend to deny. And we've been speaking about the symptoms for a long time. And in the last month or so, we've been speaking more about some of the possible resolutions to those symptoms, things we can do individually and collectively. So today's topic really builds on what we spoke about last week. Last week, we addressed something that came from Trebby Johnson's book, Radical Joy for Hard Times. And she spoke about her model based on her reading about the fishermen off the coast of Japan who survived the tsunami. And so she spoke about how she thinks we can survive the metaphoric tsunamis in our lives. And it's not easy when we get overwhelmed by large waves of things. It's not easy. But the follow-up that we want to address today is based on the title of one of the books by the Buddhist teacher, Pema Chödrön. And she has these, the title we're going to work with is Start Where You Are. That's the title of the book. So I'm going to get back to that in a second. But she's been writing books and giving talks and teachings for decades now. And her titles are so grounded in the human condition. So Start Where You Are is probably the easiest one. But her other titles include things like The Places That Scare You is another book she has. Living with Uncertainty is another book. No Time to Lose. And there's one more that I can't think of right now. But what we want to do is play with this idea of starting where you are, starting where we are, where I am. Because very often when we know something needs to be done, in our case, in our conversations, we're speaking about healing a nation, not a small task. How do you even begin? Even beginning with myself, what's the first step? And even if I know the first step, sometimes it can be overwhelming. So her message is, and let me see if I have this up. I'm going to read just a real quick excerpt from her book. She says, start where you are. You may be the most violent person in the world. That's a fine place to start. Juicy, smelly. You might be the most depressed person in the world, the most addicted person in the world. You might think there are no others on the planet who hate themselves as much as you do. All of that is a good place to start. Just where you are, that's the place to start. So it's, stop procrastinating, start looking at all the excuses and the reasons not to take the first step, whether it's resolving an issue with a friend or a colleague or a family member or your own development or growth. Just do it. Take that first step, and don't have an event horizon that looks too far in the future where you see all of the work you'll have to do over the next 10 years and it gets overwhelming. Do the thing you can do in the next minute or 5 minutes. That's it. The one last thing I'll say as part of the introduction, and I just know this from listening to other folks, but the men who have survived Navy SEAL training, the special forces, especially the first 6 weeks and Hell Week, they basically say if your event horizon is looking too far in the future, if you're imagining in a moment when you're really suffering and you're physically exhausted and some sergeant is screaming at you and telling you you're no good and playing all the psychological games they play, if you imagine 6 more weeks of this, it's almost guaranteed you're going to ring the bell, as they say, literally ring a bell, and you remove yourself from the training. But if you just stay present and do the thing you need to do in this moment, you have a much better chance of surviving the training and getting through on those first 6 weeks and Hell Week especially. So it's the same idea of keeping your event horizon immediate and not looking too far into the future at all the things that may be coming your way, and just staying focused in the now and maybe the next moment. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that title, as you say, as someone who is a person who believes in self-growth and constant, looking for constant change, working to keeping change in my life. Having that start where you are mentality, I see the benefits in it, but it also brings to mind certain questions.
Yeah.
And my questions are always centered around the mindset that because I believe that, and this is where you can correct me if I'm wrong, if she discusses this or gets into this at all, that you have to have the right mindset to believe in the faith, to believe you can start where you are. In other words, you can't have a victim mentality and say, okay, I can start where I am. I give you an example. If you're saying like you're someone who is currently unemployed and you recently just got out of prison, and so you're a felon with a criminal record and you're unemployed, and you have to change your life in that context. You got a second chance because you're free. And how do you shift your mind to starting where you are there? How do you condition your mind to get ready to say, okay, now my new journey begins, and I'm going to just begin right now with what I currently have and move forth from here?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. I really appreciate it. And so my take on that is, and two things come up. I mean, probably the least important of the two, but I'll say it first, is part of when I coach an individual and I'm working as an integral coach. It's very important for me as a coach to accept the individual where he or she or they are. In other words, I can't wish they were someone different, and I can't wish they were more like somebody else. I wish it were easier. I have to accept them where they are, because that's where we're going to start the coaching. They don't have to be they can't be on my timeline. So that's me in a relationship with somebody else. That's true with raising kids too, or even training a dog. I assume you got to accept the dog where the dog is, because you're not going to be able to use, give them a whole philosophical, talk about human nature and all that, because it's not inhuman. So you share great stories about that. But more importantly, to your question about somebody, the example of somebody just got out of prison, has had a tough time, not having a victim mentality, and obviously, I'm a tourist there because I've never been in. I actually have been in prisons to do poetry writing and some other work as a visitor, but I've never been locked up in prison. It's a sobering experience just to walk in and hear the door close behind you, even if you know you're getting out. But I think the important move there is to be able to differentiate the facts of my life. In other words, okay, I was in prison. This happened to me, that happened to me. I did this. Let's assume I was guilty, and now I'm out. Those are the facts. And you and I have been talking about healing, meaning coming to terms with things as they are. So the first step is to come to terms with the facts as they are. This is true, right? And then to be really careful, and this is when you said the victim mentality, to be really careful about what story I tell myself about those facts. So let's say I didn't have a father figure. I grew up with my mother and my grandmother. I hung out with the wrong people. I did stupid stuff. I got caught and I went to prison for a while. Right? Those are the facts. If I just then tell the story that I'm no good because my father left me and I'm a victim and I'm never going to be any good, that's a tough way. That's not where you want to start, because where you are actually is, I just got out of prison for something I did. The rest of it is a story. That's not necessarily true and not helpful. So learning the move to differentiate what's true factually and separate that from the story I have about what's true or the relationship I have with those facts. That's the move that everyone needs to make, whether they had the best father in the world, never went to prison, got an inheritance. When it comes time to grow or move through a difficult situation, even under the best of circumstances, it's important to differentiate what's true, the factual stuff, from my relationship with it or my story about it. So I don't know if that was helpful, but I think that's the move I think is really important, because we can all play the victim card. Woe is, and not to in any way minimize some people who have been victims in their lives. That's a real thing. But to just say, woe is me, the world owes me something because I've suffered so much, that's not a good place to move forward from, in my experience.
No, you definitely answered my question, because as you said, it's separating truth from fiction and not accepting the story that's been written about you, that you can write your own story. So I think that's the most empowering point that people have to accept and really take heed to. As again, Stephen R. Covey talks about in his book, The Eighth Habit, that we're born with these birth gifts. And the first birth gift is the power of choice. So you make that choice to say, I'm going to accept this, this story. That's a choice that we have. It's, where we're not operating off instinct, where you just have to do certain things. And that's why the self-growth is so important. The constant, learning, reading, discovering, and then more importantly, surrounding yourself. As you know, I'm an advocate behind the importance of building what I call your own connectionally intelligent tribe. Not only for your business, but for your life, because having the wrong people literally in your life, when I say the wrong people who are not aligned with your purpose and what your goals are. They may be the same blood, they may be the same neighborhood, they may be the same religious faith, they may be the same race, they may be the same gender, all those things, but they're not aligned with your purpose and your principles and of what you stand for, then to me, they're the wrong people, because they're not going to support you and understand where you're going. It's like telling someone when you're studying for your PhD and you're surrounded by a whole bunch of other folks who work 9-to-5 jobs. And for them, when 6 o'clock hits, it's time to drink and watch the playoffs right now. And you're like, well, no, I have to study. They're like, well, you ain't got to say tonight. This is the Lakers and, Golden State. And it's, maybe Steph and LeBron's last time they're going to play each other. So this you really get together, because we all get together. We're going to watch this series intensely. And you have to make sure you, unfortunately, have to separate yourself from them for that goal, where folks who are aligned with you may still watch the game, but they won't try to use peer pressure and convince you to watch with them. They will say, well, listen, your PhD is more important. Let me know what I can do to support you, but I respect that, and then let you go on and handle your business and stick with your commitments.
Yeah. I was actually upset because you didn't say the Knicks in Miami, but that's okay.
That's an easier one to miss. No, I'm kidding.
So, it's nice. There's excitement in New York right now. So
it is. It is interesting to see that. But yeah, I get your point on that for sure.
So I have to see the Garden filled, which hasn't been a lot in recent decades. But anyway, we're kind of digressing here.
Yeah.
So I had to just put the answer, because I grew up with I was a sophomore in high school in 69, 70. So I was with, I wanted to be Clyde, and it was Clyde, Bradley, Barnett, Willis, DeBuscher, Phil Jackson was on the bench, Cassie Russell. That was a lot of fun when I was a kid to have that, and then it happened once more and it was gone.
But I can imagine.
Yeah. But what we're really talking about, and you and I have discussed this in the past, and it's in the book, is this idea of, the very title of the book is Healing America's Narratives, not America's Soul, which is fine, or America's Heart, which would be fine. But we're speaking about healing the narrative. So coming to terms with the larger American narrative, whatever that is, because there kind of is one, but that's the one that has a shadow in it, in my experience. But all these other narratives within this country, and in any moment, whether we have been oppressed or whether we have oppressed others, whether we think we're a victim or we're a victimizer, whoever we happen to be, we always have the choice of telling a story that, in the language I like to use, is either a healing story, which comes to terms with things as they are, moves us forward towards a place of wholeness, where we're including more and more of who we are and more of the world in our story. Or we can tell an illness narrative, which many of the narratives in this country are right now. And by illness narratives tend to be very black and white, very binary. They tend to limit us, and they tend to do more harm than good, both to us, the teller of the narrative, and to others who are impacted by it. So we always have that choice to do the work of, okay, what's really true right now? Contrasting my cultural givens, and all of us are given a view of the world when we're young kids, and the view is impacted by our family, our religion, if we have a religion. It's impacted by our geography, where we happen to be born and where we grow up, by what year we're born. I was born in 1954. Somebody born in the same city, even they lived in the same house I grew up in 2004 or 2014, whole different world that they're facing, just because of the chronology of it. So each of us has to come to terms with what we were given. And then typically in adolescence, the adolescent time period is designed to do this, is to challenge the given stories. Okay, this is what my parents said, but is that really true? Because my direct experience is somewhat different. And sometimes what we're given holds up over time, so we embrace it intentionally. Sometimes it doesn't hold up over time, so we either have to revise it intentionally or choose to let it go entirely. And that's not a dishonoring of our parents or the time we were born. It's a healthy developmental move. Oh, maybe that was never true, or maybe it's no longer true. I mean, just as an example, the world I was given post-World War II, all the television, movies, and books and things depicted Germany as a bad country because of World War II. Japan was a bad country. Cowboys were good. Indians were savages, except for Tonto and a Long Ranger. He was a good Indian. And these are things that, as a kid, you take all this stuff in. And there's other examples I could use. And again, you and I have spoken about this, but I think it's an ethical obligation for an adult in the 21st century to inquire into what was given as a child, interrogate it, and then embrace it intentionally, revise it, or get rid of it. In other words, attune to your direct experience. That's not a guarantee you'll still be okay, but it's an important step in making the move to heal, to come to terms with things as they are.
And within that, I think it has to be a general sense of curiosity.
Yeah.
Of discovery, that you want to be curious about why things are the way they are. And as you lay out in your book about healing our narratives, and then we talk about the narratives of the Civil War and as relates to slavery, and then the women's movements, and then Vietnam War, and as well as Native Americans. When you begin to read that, I think your mindset before you read it has to be of a curiosity of, what can I learn about myself as it relates to not only this history of this country, but as you talked about before, why was I given these cultural givens this as a result of these events that led to my parents growing up, parents having me, the environment I grew up in, school, what I'm learning from an education standpoint. All those things you have to be open to question at that point. I wonder how many people are really ready and open to and even curious about questioning their cultural givens.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important question. I have no idea in terms of actual numbers, um, and I think a big part of it is, especially now. I mean, the immediacy of, we're in May of 2023, and there's so much overwhelm between our everyday violence, between climate changing, between among the anxiety, depression, and suicidal tendencies among our young people. Not only our young, but especially our young, and especially among young girls, teenage girls. And it makes perfect sense. It's sad and it's horrible and it's undesirable, but I don't know what it would feel like to be a child in this world. I know what it feels like to be a 60-something-year-old man, having watched the trajectory of my life and my country over 60 some odd years to land where we are now. But kids nowadays all do active shooter drills. That's part of the school curriculum. In terms of what you were pointing to there, I think it's the state of the world can be a great motivator for curiosity. Like, what's going on here? I need to figure this out. I need to understand this. But it also can be I think, a paralyzer, where we can just get paralyzed because of all the things that are happening, because of all the things that are going on. But the curiosity, I'm glad you said that word, because I say to clients that if they got nothing else out of the coaching, and hopefully they always do, but if they got nothing else out of the coaching, was if they just left coaching with a commitment to remaining curious, genuinely curious about everything for the rest of their lives, having a learner's mindset rather than a knower's mindset. Because once you know, you think, all right, I know, so I don't have to learn anything else. Right. And I forget, there's somebody that appeared in the book, that language, I forget who it was exactly. But even for me as a coach, even in a moment where I'm not sure what to do with a client, my kind of default for myself is just remain curious, listen, and just remain curious. And trust is a big part of that too. So remain curious and trust that you'll be okay. But the curiosity piece is big. Why some people get and stay curious and why others never really do. Maybe there's research. I don't know the answer to that one at all.
Yeah, I think that's becoming, in my estimate, of the last couple of weeks, even more. It's things I've been looking into and things I've been learning around the shadow element, being curious to know why you do or don't do certain things, understand your cultural givens as relates to, because again, when it comes to even the gun debate and technology, and I put those together in this context because to me, I think both, if not understanding your shadow element, can be used for something bad. And then we can come up and try to say, well, we're going to have laws to regulate, because like I give you an example on the technology side, guns obviously are what they are. Lately I've been seeing folks who are shooting people just for coming in their yards. Like it was a gentleman, I'm sure you heard about it, that neighbors told him that he was shooting his guns too loud in Texas. And he went over there and just killed 4 people, including a 8-year-old child, because he felt he had the right to shoot his gun. So it's like, what has to be going through your mind to make you be that triggered that's going to make you do that action, then have to go on a run and change your entire life just over that one incident. And where I'm going with this is, I saw a video where, I don't know if you pay much attention to technology, but 2 instances I want to make a point on real quick is, one, they made a video game now, and a video game, typically video games always use a kind of cartoon generated image. So you know that you're playing a video game because you can obviously it's not real. But now some developer has come out with a video game where it's called first person shooter, so you don't see the character, you just see your hands, and they're using the graphics of real footage, so it looks as though you're playing through that police camera.
Okay.
And so you're walking around and you can actually shoot real human beings in this video game. I mean, so it's not cartoon images at all. And folks are excited to play this. And I'm thinking like, wow, see, that's going to change the way video games are. So it's going to make it for future generations, when you grew up playing a game that's real, where it looks like a video, like it's a video camera of you shooting folks, where it's a real gun in your hand and it's real people you're looking at, you're interacting with, you're shooting, that's going to really desensitize murder in your eyes. And for a developer to create that and think that's progress, you know, that to me goes back to the similar thing about having this one person with a gun that can just be triggered to go shoot someone else. Like, this person shouldn't be allowed. So that's one example. And then another example is, I don't know how familiar you are with the new AI and the chat GBTs. And
yeah,
I think it's wonderful. I just recently got turned on to it. I'm learning all of the wonderful things I can utilize it for as an assistant. But then I'm seeing people that are teaching people how to create content from it. And it's like, well, have a chat GBT write your entire PowerPoint and then convert it to Word. And it's like, you just say, give me a topic on, you know, your topic maybe is personal growth, and you just want to create a presentation on that. And you're not actually writing it. The AI is writing it for you. You're taking it, putting it in the PowerPoint. Now you're going to go give the lecture as though an expert. And to me, that's where technology can be used the wrong way. And I think that's where I'm talking about the cultural givens of a person saying how your shadow is saying how you can use this as an edge, how I can get over, how this is going to help me find the cheat code, so to speak, in life, as opposed to help me be much more efficient and effective. I'm going to write, like for me, I would never do that. I'm still going to write my own content. I just want to have it for studying purposes, that I can have notes and outlines, but I'm never going to ask AI to write content for me. And I know that's because I've making this personal growth to become more fully human, or I don't know if that's the case or not. So I just want to make that point, that that's the danger I see of folks who don't really examine themselves, go through the changes we're talking about to become more fully human, where now things can be even more easier access to guns. I mean, you're going to be triggered easier and more prone to violence. Easier access to technology, you're going to be more quick to looking for cheat codes, which is going to be problematic down the road as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say the classical argument around technology, any technology, going back to, those folks who created that first wheel and, said, oh, look what we can do with this thing, and how that's changed human life in, many good ways, to currently now with the artificial intelligence. And, the argument is that technology is neutral and it becomes good or bad depending on who uses it and what they do with it. So, the big example of that was when humans evolved to a point cognitively, intellectually, scientifically, that they could split the atom, right, back in the 1940s. That intellectual cognitive development, the brain, had evolved beyond the current moral development of the time. So they took the split atom with all the different things that atomic power could do, and they developed the worst weapon that's ever been developed, and they used it, twice in Japan, and killed hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children. There's lots of examples. Fast forward to now, so the chat app and the this artificial intelligence is just really cool in so many ways, what it can do. But already, I mean, it's a nightmare in formal education, because students are faking their papers. So teachers are really struggling to catch up with that. And the guy that was one of Google's top people in AI, he recently resigned and wrote about and was interviewed about his warnings for what's coming down the pike, because nations then can generate so much language and fake news and put it out there quickly, and it's really hard to tell what's real and what's not real. And there are enough, going back to your point, there are enough bad actors, people who don't care about being fully human, who either just want to, number one, disrupt things, or number two, profit from what they're doing. That's the real dilemma. Let me rephrase that. That's one of the parts of this bigger dilemma. It's not the real dilemma, but our intellectual, scientific abilities far exceed our moral development as a species on this planet. And there are lots of people who take technology, whether it's in AR-15, or it's artificial intelligence, or it's splitting the atom, and use it to create great harm for other people. So, what you and I are speaking about, what is it that allows or invites some of us to want to grow and be more encompassing and love on a larger level and do more good than harm in the world, using whatever technologies are appropriate, and what is it that prevents others from that same invitation? And there are lots of explanations, from you come from a healthier family or less healthy family. What were you exposed to when you were young? I mean, even the example of the shooting in Texas, where the guy came and, he was shooting his AR-15 at 11 o'clock at night, and his next door neighbor basically said, we have an infant, can you stop? And for that request, he went in and shot up the family, shot half the people in the house. He didn't have a good childhood. His life wasn't going well, I'm sure. But how we address that on a collective level, how do we convince people to start where they are for their own growth? That's a tough one. That's a really tough question. I wouldn't pretend to know the answer to that.
Yeah. And to the point where, as you said, with technology on that same path, and we've seen this when Donald Trump got indicted, there were so many images out there that were on the internet, and images of him being arrested that were fake, and they look real.
Yeah.
So now you can create images now of folks and place them places that at certain places of committing crimes, they wasn't at the event, and you can put an image there to say, well, here he is, he's got a gun, and he's, here's the reason. And now they even have AI technology that can now duplicate your voice. And so now I can take your voice and train AI and get you to say things you never said in your voice.
Right.
So imagine where that becomes standard place. And right now that's just more like, wow, that's on the edges of, but imagine in 10, 15 years when that becomes commonplace. Now, again, going back to a person who has, the shadow element of, I want to do evil, or I want more control, I want more, the narcissistic power mindset, how they can now use that on anybody that's, that they perceive to be a threat to them, or someone who they want to bring down. And that's the world we're going to be shifting into. And I'm just curious to know, how do we prepare ourselves for that kind of space when we can just create things that are just totally that are false, just because people have evil intentions?
Yeah, so I have a biased response to that, because I didn't speak about that particular issue in the book. But, when we speak about American Shadow, you and I have spoken about 9 elements of it. And I'll just say those out loud so we can see how they come into play here. So they're ignorance, arrogance, fear, And those three right at the beginning, they really play off each other: ignorance, arrogance, and fear. Bigotry, violence, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness. Those are the 9 that are really easy to point to in this country. Probably other places as well, but the book is about the United States. And if we, as you're talking about taking technology, especially the artificial intelligence, and using it to do harm. So here's some hypotheses. So is it possible that the person who's smart enough to do dishonest things with artificial intelligence is ignorant of the real larger ramifications? Yeah, that's possible. I don't know if it's the case, but it's possible. If the person isn't ignorant, then they're arrogant enough to do harm. They're untrustworthy because they're choosing to take this technology and use the minutes of their life, their limited time on this planet as a human being, and do harm to other people. So that's untrustworthy. It's bullying. And in some cases, we could argue the definition of violence. But violence can be intellectual. It can be obviously physical. It can be emotional violence. So all of that, this using technology for nefarious means, for bad things, that's part of what we deny when we speak about the greatest democracy on the planet, which we're really not. The wealthiest, most powerful nation. We might be the wealthiest, I don't know, but it's a really unequal distribution of the wealth. So that's where the greed and excess come in the shadow. So the way into it, and this is my biased point, is until we as individuals and as small groups and as larger groups and as a nation really look at this American shadow, what we make believe isn't true. It's like the dance band on the Titanic, because we've hit the ice. The iceberg has been hit between climate change, violence every day, the polarization of our national government. It's not like there's an iceberg coming. We've hit the iceberg. And to the extent we continue to make believe that the ship isn't sinking is the extent to which we're in denial of shadow. And until we can recognize, if you listen to the news or read the news every day, and I like to use the phrase that our representatives in Congress, the national legislature, and our paid performance news commentators, those who perform the news, and they roll their eyes, they nod, they wink, and they give you their opinions on the news. They're not really journalists. They play whack-a-mole every day. The latest story of a shooting, the latest story of the polarization. Nowadays it's the debt ceiling and when the government's going to stop working because they're going to run out of money. That's happened over and over again in my lifetime. The latest climate event. On Monday, over 70 motor vehicles were crashed on Interstate 55 outside of Chicago because of a dust storm. At least 6 people died. That's a climate event happened there. We have the same stories repeating, and every day, legislatures and news commentators take out their little sticks and they try to whack these same moles who go down underground again and then appear somewhere else. They play whack-a-mole. They don't get anywhere near the core elements of what's really wrong, including climate change, which is terrifying, because everything else is moot. We can talk about race, gender, wealth, all that other stuff. And those are all really important, but things are going to continue to drastically change, especially for people who live along the coast of the country, for people who live in areas that flood regularly, and for people who live in areas that are prone to tornadoes, hurricanes, and fires. That's been in play for over a decade now. And we make believe that's not really happening. So we play whack-a-mole. One of my teachers, Ken Wilber, when somebody challenged him saying that, they asked him, what's the main thing that human beings on the planet have to really address sooner rather than later. This was 20 years ago or more. He asked this question, and the questioners wanted him to say climate change because that's kind of the obvious answer. If there's one thing that affects the whole planet, he said climate change. He said no, it's individual development. He said, what? What do you mean? He said, until enough people on the planet develop to the point, this is not the language he uses, this is going to be my language, where they grow to a point of eco-awareness, where they're aware of the ecology and the environment. That's actually Bill Plotkin's language, eco-awareness. Until enough people on the planet see that climate change and the planet is in trouble as a major issue, as the issue of our time, until enough people see that, it's not going to get addressed. So we have to develop people to see this bigger picture. I tend to think that that's the answer to all of these issues: race, gender, violence, depression, suicide, all of it. Wealth distribution, until enough people develop to a point where they say, well, we're all in this together, we're all human. Even we're all Americans would be a good start. Like, we really don't have that. We say it. Politicians say the American people want this. Well, yeah, who are you talking about? Which ones are you talking about? Because we're not agreeing on anything really. But it's this where you and I are constantly talking about this growth mindset, this developmental mindset of wanting to understand more and more about myself and the world out there and other human beings, including the health of the planet. Until that happens, American whack-a-mole seems to be the name of the game, and for me, it's terrifying. I mean, I'm pretty much an optimistic person. I'm realistic, but I believe in the goodness of people. But in terms of leadership, I'm not particularly confident in what we have. And when I say that, I don't mean a particular president or a particular person in Congress. I mean, you can take all three branches of the federal government. I'm talking about all of it. Leadership at the highest level, including CEOs of most major corporations. They're years late and many dollars short in addressing these issues.
Absolutely. We reached a part of our show where we want to look at how we began to look for some possible solutions, some possible work that folks can do post podcast. And so, with that being said, what do you see as ways that people can really take into account all the things we discussed today, whether it's technology changing, whether it's the environment, global warming, whether it's a political landscape and polarization of those things, the violence that we see out here in the streets? How do we start where we are now to put ourselves back on the path to become fully human?
Yeah, so for any individual who's interested in that, and I just heard this last night, I've heard this before, I'm going to quote somebody. You have to do the thing that you can do. So one of my heroes growing up, still is a hero of mine. He's struggling now. He's 86 years old. Is Chris Christopherson. I wanted to be him when I was 16 years old. Mm-hmm. U.S. Army Ranger captain, singer-songwriter, Rhodes Scholar. He had everything going on. But he was asked in an interview, which is probably from 20 years ago or more, when he wrote a whole album about American involvement during the Reagan administration in Central America and what really happened down there. And the interviewer said, well, did you really think were you disappointed that it was going to change anything? Did you think you were going to change anything by writing 12 songs? And his response was and he's a really bright guy. He's a Rhodes Scholar and everything else. And he said, well, it wasn't so much that what I did was going to change, writing some songs was going to change things. It was the thing that I personally could do. It was what I'm good at. And it was my contribution to this bigger, problem. So I would say to anybody who's concerned about, what you and I are talking about, whether it's climate change or any of the other issues, is, again, keep your event horizon close. What is it that you can do? It might just be kinder to the cashier in the supermarket. It might just be, whatever it is, start where you are with your skill set. It doesn't matter if you're an accountant, plumber, if you're unemployed, it doesn't matter. Start where you are. Do that. I write books and I teach and I coach. Because I've found out over it's taken me a long time, but I figured I'm pretty good at those three things. But it's not about writing books or teaching and coaching. It's finding your niche, your niche. What Bill Plotkin calls your unique ecological niche, your place in the world, in the larger world, and do the things you can do in there. That's the only thing that any one of us can do. And if you can find like-minded people, as you and I talk about, the people with whom we're attuned, then you can kind of do it collectively and make it bigger and bigger. But the place to start is with yourself immediately within what you can do. If you're not a songwriter, don't try to write songs, right? If you're not skilled at campaigning and being a politician, don't run for office. Do the thing that you can do, whatever that is, because we all have some gift.
Okay. Well, I believe that's true, and I think that having that faith to know that, as we talked about at the very beginning of the podcast, that whatever you're going through won't last long, that it's not permanent, and that you can change, and that change is going to be, what I've learned about change, it's not such a thing in my mind, at least, whether change is good or change is bad. It's change. Now, how, I perceive it is whether it's good or bad that's relative. But change is what I seek, and I'm a person that, wants the change to happen every, I don't know how exactly, but definitely every 5 years, I want a significant change in where I live, what I'm doing, who I'm connected to. I want that change because that to me is, I love to grow. I love to meet new people and experience new things. And that to me is the only way that I can see it continuing to happen. So I definitely appreciate today's topic. I think that's definitely on point. And we reached a point of the show where we want to give examples of who we believe or folks who exhibit the fully human characteristics, again, whether they're alive or whether they're deceased, that we feel have done that to the best of his ability. I'll go first this time, and I would say that a person that comes to mind now is, and I'm using a writer, and I know those writers get used quite a bit in people's quotes and things of nature, but I've been reading him lately just to kind of set the context with things. But that's Mark Twain. And I love Mark Twain as a writer. I love him as a human being just because of his outlook on the world and what he wrote about. And when you watch his, and I say watch because I actually got a chance to watch a 4-part documentary on his life, or 4 or 6-part documentary on his life, and things I never knew about. Like I never knew that he had gone through a lot of financial challenges. And the only thing he could do to really get himself out of that was to go on stage and perform and actually, read stories and interact with people on stage. And he was able to leverage that. And just the gifts that he gave us and the books that he's written, his quotes that he used that are meaningful in his life, is just an example of somebody who, I believe I believe that we are spiritual beings having a human experience more so than human beings having a spiritual experience. And I think that when you create your energy on this planet, it stays based off the legacy that you leave, the work that you create, the impact that you left, and you still become relevant, that you can die 100 years ago and people still reading your works and people still quoting your thoughts, then you're still here. You're still in the ecospace that folks can tap into and tap into their energy. So that's my example of someone who I believe exhibited the qualities of being fully human.
Yeah, beautiful. That just told me something about Mark Twain I don't know. And I studied literature. He's an interesting character. I almost want to talk more about him, but I'll just jump in here. So I mentioned Christofferson. I'm going to stay with him for now. he lived consistently with a level of integrity where he wrote the songs he wanted to write. He lost publishers. He wrote, production companies because they didn't agree with his politics and what he had to say. And he just stayed true to himself in a very honest way with integrity. And I want to just expand that out slightly. Over the weekend, they had in Hollywood, they had a birthday party, not for Christopherson, but for Willie Nelson, who just turned 90.
Wow.
And and so
wow.
And there were just clips from people's cell phones that you can see on YouTube. But the thing I want to point to is the number and the nature of the people who showed up there, including Christopherson, who really can't sing anymore and who was struggling with health. But he was on the stage 3 times, being kind of walked in by Johnny Cash's daughter, Roseanne, and then by the other singer-songwriter, Norah Jones, who is wonderful. But one of the best moments, and this has been going on for over close to a decade now, but one of the songs that Willie wrote some years ago was called "Roll Me Up and Smoke Me When I Die," because he's known as, smoking a lot of pot. And because of that interest, and he has his own pot company, he became good friends with Snoop Dogg. And they sang on the song together 5 years ago. Christopherson, Willie Nelson, Merle Haggard, and Snoop sang the song together. So at the 90th birthday party, Willie was sitting most of the time. And he was constantly like saying, "What key are we in?" Like asking him what key we're in. But Snoop came out and they sat down next to each other and they sang that. And Willie kept forgetting the words and Snoop kept covering for him. So it was this, the point I'm trying to make about Fully Human, where I was almost in tears seeing Christopherson, because I know him when he was in his 30s, when I first saw him in concert. And I spoke to him when he was 69. I got to tell him how much I admired him. I was 51. I felt like I was 12. But what happened on the stage was you had people from the world of rap and hip hop. You had country stars, you had pop stars, because Willie Nelson sang with everybody. That was one of his really cool traits. And they were all there. He had 2 of his sons on the stage, and he didn't want to stop. It went on for 2 days. And the very last thing he did, he's sitting in the chair and they're trying to end the show. And he starts singing "Happy Birthday to Me," he says. So they all started singing with him. So he's this real artist. Like, he has gotten in trouble with the IRS because of money stuff. He's gotten all kinds of trouble, but he just stayed true to his gift in the world. And at 90 years old, he could still reasonably well remember some of the lyrics and play a lot of the songs. And it was his friendship with Christopherson over the years that got, they were both on the stage together. But that's that full, find the thing you're good at. Yeah, maybe it's more fun if you're a performance artist like Snoop or Willie or Chris, whatever. But most of us don't live that way. Those are rare people. Most of us get up and we do our jobs and nobody really knows too much about it. But find that thing. And that's what this Fully Human piece is all about. So that's my second rant of this episode.
No, I'm just imagining. I didn't see it, but I'm imagining, as you talked about the impact of having Snoop, Chris Christopherson, Merle Haggard, and Willie Nelson all on stage together.
Yeah. Well, they weren't on stage this time because Merle Haggard he died a few years ago, but they recorded the song about 5 years ago or more, and Snoop and Willie did the song live. Chris wasn't on for that particular number; he was on for some other numbers.
Okay.
But just that the measure of who they are. I mean, remember Tom Jones, the Welsh pop singer from decades ago? He was there. He's like 83. Then there's all these young folks from the country scene, the current country stars who honored Willie, and then just other people from other types of music. It was amazing because, Willie recorded with Ray Charles. He recorded with Julio Iglesias. He recorded with everybody. So, people came back to say thank you, I guess. And
that's kind of impact is, I would say I want to have on a world where I can bring people from diversities, perspectives, cultures, they can all come together. Then I know I've made a difference and I've been worldly in my experience and not just only bring one sect of people together, who are surrounding me and who are, comfortable being with me. So that's a perfect person who I believe that's definitely a great example of someone who exhibited fully human. As we wrap up the show, I just want to get you on tape, as they say. It shows my age when I say on tape, but get it recorded. Your pick in the series with New York and Miami.
So I don't have a rational pick. I have an emotional pick. I'd love to see. I mean, for the Knicks to get past the second round of the playoffs, that's a big deal. And and I don't watch all the games. I mean, I don't have the time to really sit and watch any sports from beginning to end. But I'd love to see the Knicks win. I like some of the players. A couple of guys that played at Villanova because I'm St. John's alum, and they've fallen on hard times as well. But now they have Patino. We'll see what happens. But the two guys that played for Villanova that are with the Knicks now. So, I have the kind of the New York bias. So if they have a shot, I'm going to cheer for them. Yeah.
Well, they try their best to lose that game. Jules Randle stepping on the line. It's like, that's it. The Knicks will try to lose. It's like, watching them in the Clippers. They rip your heart out at times when no matter how good they look and how talented they may be, it's like they're going to do something. But
well, now that you asked the question, there was a New York Times piece yesterday, and they were interviewing all the Knicks fans because they get down. You're in Penn Station before Knicks game. There's people with orange and blue with wigs. It's crazy. I mean, a lot of other cities do the same thing. It's not just the Knicks. But they asked this one guy, about the Knicks' propensity to try to give the game away at times, and he said, that happens, but the difference between the Knicks fans and Nets fans, Brooklyn Nets, he says, we trust them and we know they're going to come back the next time. The Nets fans just give up, he said. So even like right in the city, there's this like
that rivalry.
They're going after each other. So the Nets fans just give up. But we've been through it for so many years. We never give up. So it's pretty funny.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how the playoffs make themselves out. But again, I want to thank you again for another great show, another great topic, thought-provoking, something that I can definitely learn from. Hopefully everyone who's listened to this podcast, whether it's live or the folks who don't listen to the podcast as a recording, will see the value and see the importance of reading your book. And then more importantly, looking at, that's what I like about your book, is not just reading it from a historical context and saying, here's what happened in the world, here's a true history, but it's like, okay, now how do I begin to start to heal myself and begin to start making changes in the world, and through those changes, hopefully impacts and influences other people, and then even in your own local community, local environment, that can now begin to start to be the seed that triggers other folks who want to start to become more fully human. So I want to thank everyone again, listening audience, for listening. Reggie, thank you again for your commitment of time and developing the topic. And until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., wish everybody a more productive and blessed week. And that's all. Continue to be on the journey to become more fully human. Thank you.